Alright, I'm going to do a continuation of something I was doing with the oil pastels, but I'm going to do it with oil paint. I've drawn a line on the canvas, I've divided it in two, and I've made two shapes, so it's the same design as what I used on the oil pastels. I'm using a little Delmar varnish as a medium to thin the paint, and I am going to start out with a pretty simple color. I've just added a little black and a little bit of blue, and I'm mixing it fairly thick, but not impasto. That's not what I'm doing here. This is just to show how to mix colors with oil paint, like I showed with the oil pastels. But this time I'm going to do it to show what it's like with paint. Now, I don't know, for some reason I decided this one I would just put some dark edges. This is kind of a scratchy brush, but it won't matter because when I start working the other colors, I'll take care of that. I'm just doing this to make it look a little bit like it's raised up. Now, often when I work with oil paint, I'm not super precise about the things that I'm doing, because later I'll come back. I'm just putting a little color on here. Just a little bit to raise that up to make that a kind of a dark edge. So that's my black. Now for the first color, I put some red in here. Again, I'm going to just thin it with a little bit of Damar. And I'm going to mix it. I'm going to keep this pretty simple. This red is going to mix with now I used crimson. This is a generic paint set, so what I usually use is alizarin crimson, but this just says crimson on it. So I've got that. Now I know that it's going to blend a little bit with the black as I paint, because I'm working wet. That's the whole thing on this one. This is going to be wet paint on wet paint. Whatever I do to this side, I'm going to do to this shape. So I got to keep that in mind as I work, because this I don't want to have to keep remixing stuff. Okay. Now I'm going to blend this red out a little bit. take the brush and it's liquidy paint up in the area where you're painting, and then as I go out, I let it get scratchier on the surface and thinner. Now, I'm going to go back in since I've gotten away from the black, and I'm going to mix this a little bit more, and I'm going to put a little bit more red on. Now the next thing I'm doing is I'm mixing, I put a drop of more Damar varnish in, and I added some vermilion. I mix that. I'm going to come in and scrub that into the two shapes. I put it on thick here. Now there's a lot thicker, you can paint it much thicker than this with oil paint in Pasto, but that's not what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to paint like Van Gogh. This is a thinner, this is how you would build things up and make a portrait of a face, or this is a really simple version of painting with oil paint. Something that you do with oil paint, that you can do with oil paint, which makes it interesting, is that you can paint layers and let them dry. You can add something called China dryer, and that will make the paint set faster. Okay, so there's that layer. Now I'm going to add another color. At this point, this is kind of a gray yellow. It's an ochre, and it's a gray yellow. I'm not going to mix this completely with the red because I feel like I've got too much red on there, and I want this to change color a little faster. So I've added another drop of Damar, like a quarter teaspoon or something like that. This all depends on how much. Now this is a little thicker than the last batch of paint that I had, but this will work. So there's that. I'm going to first paint it on in a layer around the edge of the red, and since there's quite a color transition here, I'm going to have to use a technique to blend them. And we got to go over here. So I've got those on there. Now what I have to do is take this brush with not much pigment on it, and I have to carefully soften this edge by blending it into the red that was before, because I'd like to not have an edge there. Alright, now ready for the last color for this side. I've added a brighter yellow, and I'm going to mix it and try not to get it up there too much into the other colors. That's not quite bright enough. I'll work with this little area of paint that I got mixed right here. Now, gonna do the same thing I did on the last one. And then I'm going to go back and blend these edges. Painted that around on there. I'm going to get the color again. Go back over here and finish this shape out. See how the black muddies the color? That's okay because these little shapes don't have to be exact. And there's one half. Just like I did on the oil pastel, I'm going to use kind of an opposite color to start the other side. So I'm going with green. And I took a little bit of this red up here and mixed it into the green to gray it slightly. I'll put just a tad more in. Gray it just slightly more. It's going to get grayed along this edge because of the fact that there's black there and there's red on the other side, and I'm working wet on wet. If you let the paint dry in between layers, it doesn't mix. But this is a fast painting. Really fast for oil paint. You don't paint this fast if you're trying to paint something careful, like a portrait or a landscape where you're trying to be accurate. If you're working off of a photograph or something. Now, I'm going to blend it out like I did on the other side by using this scratchy little stroke. Now I got to do the same thing to the other side, so I got to put a little more fresh paint on. Alright, that should give me something to blend with the next color. I add a touch of white and you can see what it does to the color. It takes it from, it makes it a chalky looking color, but it also makes it a lighter color. So we take this, mix it, put this on there. I can go fast right there because that's a pretty easy place to paint. Now we scratch this into that other paint just a little bit to blend it. So that color's blended in. Alright, this time I added a little cobalt blue. And I'm mixing it up on this side because I don't want so much. I don't want to get so much of that last color in there. Again, I added a little more varnish. Gently scratch it into here. I'm just kind of putting speckles of it into the next color there. Here, I'll be a little more defined. Gotta go get some more. I'm going over the last color that I used, putting an edge between the two colors, the new color and the one that I'm currently using, or between the one that between the last color and this color, and then I scratch this out into here a little bit. And blend it into this side. Okay. For the last color, I've decided to add a little touch of white and try not to get too much of any of the colors before in it. Just a little bit. Like I said, this is a pretty limited set of oil paints. I don't have that many colors to work with, but you can get the idea. I've got to be careful again because these edges can be muddied up because of the fact that I'm using colors that are, I got colors that are opposite. I'm working wet on wet. Wet on wet, the paint always can get mixed into the new area that you're working, and then you get, if you got green and red next to each other, they'll turn into mud. If you got any opposite colors, turn into mud. So you got to be careful around the edges. Okay, at one level this painting is done. I don't really like the colors on it, but it's definitely got what I was going for as the blending thing. You can see the red transitioning over to the orange color and the green transitioning over to the light blue. There's some speckles on it in a few places. What I think I'm probably going to do is add one last brightening layer. So I'm going to scratch a little tiny bit of yellow into this edge over here. And into this over here. Just use the tip of the brush to just kind of get rid of some of the little white speckles. I don't like any white showing. Take this yellow and scratch it in a little bit right here. Now, that's it. That's a blending technique with oil paint that's wet on wet. If you were trying to paint, it would be better to paint either you can take this and imagine that you use this technique to do small, very tiny areas, and then you would use smaller brushes, or you could do large areas on a canvas with this. This is a pretty crude technique for a canvas this size because I use pretty large brush to make it a quicker tutorial, but this is how you get oil paint to blend with a wet on wet technique. I prefer to work with oil paint where I let it dry in between the layers, and I do this sort of thing, and then I let layers dry, and then there's a nice, you can have a sharp edge if you let it dry. You can do a lot more with it. But this is just one simple oil paint technique that's similar to what I did on the oil pastel.